Hello and welcome. Today we're looking at how to hack our very own Amelia dress sewing pattern, and we are going to be looking at how to transform the dress to create this look here. Now, in this version of the Amelia dress, you can see the immediate impact is that we've lengthened the sleeves all the way down to the wrist. We have also lengthened the dress so that it is a lovely long maxi dress. And then we're also going to add a really dramatic square collar with some cute little ruffle details to accent it. It's going to look absolutely gorgeous. I'm Izzy at Minerva, and I'm going to talk you through step by step how to draft these changes using the original pattern pieces. And then I'm going to sew it up using this stunning fabric, which is our Minerva Exclusive fabric. And then we're going to showcase the design to you and show you what it looks like. We're going to have lots of fun today. So as you follow along today, you're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools and also the pattern, the Amelia dress pattern. So go and grab that, cut out your pattern size, and then we're ready to go. Now, in today's video, we are going to be using the pattern as a base, and I will be showing you how to change the pattern pieces, and then I'm only going to show you and demo the steps that are different to the original pattern. If you need help with the original pattern steps and those sewing steps in the booklet, you can, of course, refer to the sew along video on our YouTube channel. In today's video, I am wearing a self-drafted little cardigan in our Minerva core range fabric. And this is our chunky cotton stretch knit fabric in almond. Absolutely gorgeous, really cute, and really comfy to wear. Okay, let's get straight on into drafting. The first thing we're going to look at is pretty straightforward, and it's very simply lengthening the skirt. Okay, to start off with, grab your back skirt pattern piece, and you can see that I've cut out my size. Do the same for you. Now, we want this to be a maxi dress, so everyone's height is different, and the joy of hacking a pattern is that you can create it to fit you in a bespoke way. So grab a tape measure and measure from your waist down to the floor so that you get the appropriate length of dress that you want. Now, when I measure myself, my waist to floor is 113 centimeters. So that's just bespoke to me. For you, it will be something different. Make sure you've got your correct waist measurement and measure from there down to the floor. This notch up here is actually our waist notch. So just make a note of that. And basically you want to extend the skirt line here from the waist the length that you need it to be. Okay, so add a little piece of paper down to the bottom of the skirt. I'm then going to extend from the waist all the way down 113 centimeters. Okay, so now what we're going to do, now we've lengthened it to the length that we want, we need to add a little seam allowance to the bottom. So add an extra 1.5 centimeters to the length of your skirt, just like that. Okay, great. Now measure from the bottom of the skirt up to the hemline. For me, is 37 centimeters that I'm extending my skirt by. Mark a consistent 37 centimeters offset from the bottom of your hemline, or obviously whatever length you need. For me, this is my bespoke length of 37 centimeters. I want the skirt to come all the way down to the floor. I want to wear it with some really nice big heels. I think it's going to look super glam. I cannot wait to sew this up and wear it. Now, just remember that when you come down to the center back, your skirt needs to be at right angles. The line, the bottom of the hem needs to be at right angles to the center back here. So just use your ruler to square it off at the bottom, and then continue that curve all the way around to the side seam. Wonderful. Let's cut out that extended skirt pattern piece now. Wonderful. So that is your pattern piece now complete. That's the change you made to the back. Let's repeat the whole same process for the front, extending the hemline by 37 centimeters. Okay, so here's our skirt pattern piece. Add a piece of paper and then extend the hem by 37 centimeters, or whatever length you need. Okay, and there the pattern piece is completely finished. Okay, let's now move on to the sleeve pattern piece. We're very simply just going to extend that length of the sleeve to the full length of our arm. So what you need to do is grab a tape measure and measure from your shoulder point, so the top of your shoulder, all the way down to your wrist, And you actually want to do that with your arm bent like that. Okay, so measure it all the way down to the wrist, the cuff down at the bottom here. For me, it's 57 centimeters. For you, it will be something completely different. Make a note of that dimension. Now, working from the very top up here, just annotate where the seam allowance is, which is 1.5 centimeters. Okay, next we want to draw a line straight down from that notch all the way down to the bottom, and it needs to be parallel with your grain line. So a nice, quick and easy way to sort that out, to make sure you're getting a nice parallel line, is very simply just to, I'm lining up my ruler with the grain line there and drawing a line that's perpendicular, like that. And then I can line up my ruler again using this little dashed line with that perpendicular line and drop a line straight down from the top. Add a little piece of paper underneath and then extend that line from here, from your seam allowance, all the way down by the length of your arm. So for me, 57 centimeters. For you, it would be something different. Okay, now add and extend that line by 1.5 centimeters for your seam allowance for your cuff. Okay, now measure the distance from the bottom of the line up to here. For me, it's 28.5 centimeters. And then just continue to dash out the distance all the way around. So you're going to create a nice new sort of curve for the bottom of the hemline. And then cut out that pattern piece. This is now going to create a really dramatic long sleeve. It's basically going to drop from like here down to the table. It's a really nice long dramatic sleeve. Now you may want to add like a little elastic cuff to that, or you may want to finish it off differently. We're just going to do the basic one here for you now, so to create that really lovely long sleeve. Great, so our sleeve pattern piece is now complete. Let's move on to the collar. Okay, take your front bodice pattern piece, draw your seam allowance. Mark a point 2 centimeters below the shoulder seam at the arm-side point on the seam allowance. Take your back bodice pattern piece and again annotate your seam allowance. Don't forget to do your neck seam allowance over here too. So that's 1.5 centimeters offset at all points. Brilliant. Probably the easiest thing to do now is then with this one, just fold that seam allowance of the shoulder seam down like that, just so it's temporarily hidden. And of course you can do the same for the front. Great, so then with the back bodice, we're then going to align this point here with that point there, beautifully, just like that. So when it's sewn together, actually, that is exactly what it's going to look like, because the seam allowances are tucked on the inside. And then using your finger, just keep that as a pivot point there and rotate this over so that it hits that 2 centimeter offset point there. Now just use some masking tape just to temporarily stick that in place. Okay, grab a piece of tracing paper and pop it over the pattern pieces so far. Draw a line that is perpendicular to the center front from the bottom of the neckline V. Square up approximately 4 centimeters from the arm side at that point. Now this is just a help line, so I'm going to dash this out. I'm not sure about exactly where it's going to be yet. And then I want us just to continue to curve 4 centimeters offset from the arm side and just dash that out. Now measure the distance from this point here where it starts to go off into a curve to the edge of the neckline here. For me it's 9.5 centimeters. Working from the top up here, mark a point that's 9.5 centimeters below the neckline and square across until you meet your curved dashed line. Okay, so we've now got the basic shape done. Basically wanting the collar to be square at the bottom down here, but then curve up and follow the shape of our shoulder, because that aesthetically just looks really nice. What we need to do now is to draw in our seam allowances. We can just trace over our existing neckline here, because this seam allowance is already allocated for on the pattern underneath our tracing paper. And just extend it down a little bit further. Add your 1.5 centimeter seam allowance to the bottom of the collar and all the way around the curve which sits across our shoulder. and then of course finish it off down the bottom here. Okay, we have a zip at the back, so we still need to make sure that the collar has a bit of an opening at the back so the zip can like come all the way up and overlap really nicely. So just add and follow the seam allowance line, the pattern piece at that point here. Wonderful. And then your grain line is going to follow the front line grain line, which is right here. And this is our collar. We're actually going to cut 4 because we need an upper collar and an under collar on both sides, and it's going to be split down the back here. Okay, let's now add a little ruffle to the perimeter of the collar. This is a super cute little detail. Basically all we need to do is create a really long rectangle, which is twice the length of the actual collar piece. So let's start to measure out the collar pattern piece. Okay, so working from the seam allowance of the collar here across to the seam allowance there, just mark and annotate the length of that line. Using your ruler, do the same down here. Obviously we've got a seam allowance to account for as well, so you can just mark that seam allowance in there and measure from the seam allowance to the other seam allowance here. For me that was 12 centimeters. Grab your tape measure and just measure the length of this curved seam allowance, that point there, to the other seam allowance there. Take a calculator and add all 3 of those measurements together. We're then going to times it by 2.5, and that is going to give us the length of the pattern piece that we need for this collar, so just for like 1/2 of the collar. So for me it's 140 centimeters. Now the reason why we times it by 2.5 is very simply so that it has like loads of dramatic gathers to it. It's going to look really cute when it's done. You can times it by 2 and that will give a less dramatic gather effect, or you could times it by more than 2.5 up to 3. I wouldn't really recommend going above 3.5 to 4 centimeters because otherwise it will just be like too much fabric and we don't want to create too much of a dramatic look. Now that we've done that though, let's now create our big long rectangle ruffle pattern piece. Okay, now the length of my rectangle is 140 centimeters. That's the entire length that I need to create it to be. But a piece of fabric, usually when we cut out our pattern pieces, the fabric is like placed, like folded over. So I'm going to actually create a pattern piece that says like cut on fold, so that it's easier to cut out. So if the full length that I need is 140 centimeters, I'm just going to divide it by 2 to get the length that I need to draw for my pattern piece, which is 70 centimeters. So whatever length you've got, just draw a nice long line that is that long, and we're going to add a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance as well. Now the height of your ruffle needs to be, well, it can be whatever you want it to be, can't it? I'm going to do mine at 3 centimeters, so I'm actually going to double that because when I cut out the fabric I want it to be like doubled over, so it's like the right side is on either side of the ruffle. I've got a nice crisp finish at the end. So then I'm going to draw a second line which is 6 centimeters above and parallel to my original line. Now this doesn't account for our seam allowances, so we're going to add those in next. Now on one side we're going to say that it's going to be placed on the fold, and so we don't need to add a seam allowance there, but we do need to add a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters to the remaining perimeter of the pattern piece. So the grain line is just going to run straight up like this, and we need to annotate the pattern piece. So this is called the collar ruffle, cut 2 on the fold. Excellent, so you can cut out that pattern piece. Well done. All of our pattern drafting is now done. Let's get into sewing the pattern pieces up. So cut out all those pattern pieces. We've made quite a lot of changes, so you're going to need some extra fabric, definitely, compared to what the pattern recommends, and obviously depending on the size that you cut originally. I'm now going to talk you through how to sew the steps that are different from the original pattern instructions. Let's go and do that now together. So we've got 2 pieces of collar ruffles, and to start off with each piece we're just going to fold it right sides together and just sew down the short edge at 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So do that on all 4 of the short ends to start off with as we prepare the collar piece. Once you've sewn the short ends together, just clip into the corners and then turn it right side out and give it a little press. And as you give it a press and as you turn it right side out and give it a press, I want us then to iron the wrong side together so that it's a long strip of fabric with right side on both sides. So give that a nice neat press, lining up those raw edges nice and neatly. You might want to give it a little pin as you go to pin those raw edges together. Okay, and once you've pinned that together and pressed it in place like that, we're then just going to sew 2 long lines of gathering stitches. So the stitch length is going to be the longest stitch length you've got on your sewing machine, probably about 5mm long. And then we're going to reinforce the stitch at one end, sew all the way along to the other end, and when we hit the other end, we're just going to leave a nice tail of thread. We're going to do that 2 times, so run 2 lines of parallel stitches in that manner. The first line is going to be 1/2 centimetre, 5mm away from the raw edge, and the second line of stitching running parallel is going to be 1 centimetre offset from the raw edge. So let's go. Okay, brilliant. We've done the prep work for the ruffles now, and we can start just to pull on 2 of the strings on one side of the fabric, and it will start to ruffle. But what we need to do next is just grab our collar pieces next. Okay, this is the collar piece. This is the inner neckline, and it's going to attach together basically, you know, like that. In 3D, obviously, it'll be like that and look really nice and square and gorgeous. We want our ruffle to go from the point down here, from the bottom of the neckline, around the collar, and then up across around the shoulders, and then finish at that point there. So we'll just work on one side to start off with, and take the ruffle piece that you've started to gather and just continue to gather it until it is the length of this area here. So this is going to take a couple of minutes, so just take your time and then we'll pin it in a minute. Okay, so I've made my ruffle here, it's looking really nice. I've evenly distributed all of the gathers, so it's given me a really nice strong gather cluster. And what I'm going to do is just attach the raw ends and pin them to this collar. However, I want to start the edge of the ruffle at 1.5 centimeters away from this part here, simply because I'm going to be attaching that into the neckline, and there's going to be a stitch line there. I don't want this to overlap the stitch line. So pin it in place nice and carefully, making sure that you're pinning it at 1.5 centimeters away from the neckline to start off with. So get that first pin in place. Brilliant. And then just continue pinning all the way around the collar. So the ruffle is attached to the collar. When you reach the other end of the collar down here, just make sure that the ruffle is again 1.5 centimeters from this straight line edge here, and just pin that in place. This is looking really fun already, isn't it? Okay, brilliant. Once you've pinned all of that in place, we're just going to sew it together using a basting stitch, so a long stitch length at just 1 centimeter offset from the raw edge. Okay, grab your other collar piece, the one that's not interfaced, and lay it on top of your collar, and we're literally just going to pin it in place all the way around. So from here all the way around, up and across, leaving the neckline section open. Okay, and once that's pinned, you're going to sew from the back, centre back, all the way along, using your standard stitch length and your standard seam allowance. Wonderful. So now we've got the little ruffle sandwiched in between these 2 pattern pieces. It's going to look gorgeous. So now just trim down the seam allowance, because it's going to be really, really bulky, especially at these corners, and then trim the rest in half. Excellent. And when you've done that, let's just turn it right side out. Oh my goodness, this is going to look gorgeous. Wow, so pretty. Okay, give that a really good press so that it's nice and crisp around the edges, and then repeat that whole process for the other collar. Okay, so those 2 collar pieces are now done, and they are ready to insert and put onto our dress. So once you've sewn the collar section, you can then prep and continue all the pattern pieces and all the steps exactly as per the instructions. And I've basically got up to step 8. I have attached the skirt onto the front piece as well, but that doesn't matter. You can just get up to step 8. You can also prep step 9, which is the facing, and then what we need to do is sandwich our collar in between the facing and the bodice. So let's do that now. So take one of your collar pieces, and basically all we need to do is really simply lay it on top of your bodice and just pin it all the way around the neckline. Once you've done one collar, repeat for the other side. Lovely. Okay, so once you've pinned it in place, we're just going to baste it in place, because then we need to put the facing on top and sandwich the facing between the two of them. You'll note down at the bottom down here, I've got a really neat crossover, and they're both touching exactly at the bottom of the V of the neckline, so that we've got a nice even finish when we open it out and it attaches onto the main body. So sew that using a basting stitch at 1 centimetre offset from the raw edge. So take your facing pattern piece and just lay it on top of the collar. Pin in place all the way around, making sure you're matching the shoulder seams together for the facing. Excellent, and once you've pinned it, we're going to sew it using our standard seam allowance all the way around. Just be really careful at the bottom of the V that you're just making sure you're catching it exactly where the bottom of the collar is going to sit. So you might want to just take that part really slowly as you sew it. Okay, that's looking really good. We're now just going to continue the steps exactly as the instruction booklet has. So although we've now attached our collar, we've basically now attached the facing. We've done step 10 effectively. And now we're just going to press the seam allowances exactly as it says in step 11. We're going to snip into the seam allowance, and then we're going to iron it and press it under. And then we're going to continue sewing the rest of the steps exactly as it has in the instruction booklet, continuing to sew our side seams. Obviously our skirt is longer, so that's a little bit different. But it's exactly the same process. And then we're going to touch and look at our sleeves. So come back and join me when you hit your sleeves. Okay, so our sleeve pattern piece is basically going to be constructed in exactly the same way as it says in the instruction booklet. The only difference is that our sleeve is really long and dramatic, and the sleeve here is like elbow length, and we're just extending it so it's longer. So basically your side seams are going to be longer, and really that's it. We're still going to finish the hem in the same way, and we're going to insert it into the dress in the same way into the armscye. So just prepare your sleeves exactly as the instruction booklet says. And then let's go take a look and see what it looks like. Wonderful. So here is our beautiful adapted dress. We've got long sleeves, a square collar with a ruffle detail, and it's also a beautiful, elegant, long maxi dress going right down to the floor in such gorgeous elegance. So there we go, we've completed our beautiful little pattern hack for the Amelia Dress sewing pattern. It does look completely different, doesn't it, compared to the original pattern. I think adding that collar really does kind of add a little bit more drama and kind of a big design shift to the pattern as well, which is quite an interesting process to see, isn't it? So thank you for joining me. I've been Izzy at Minerva, and don't forget we've got a few more of these pattern hacks for you. If you've really enjoyed this one, do take a look at the rest on our YouTube channel.